Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Bridget Anderson, the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Today, we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Welcome to our Business Resiliency series, Navigating COVID-19. Today, we will discuss the latest support available from the Government of British Columbia for businesses with the Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Competitiveness, the Honourable Michelle Mungall. In this time of unprecedented uncertainty, we want to make sure that our members and the broader business community can find answers to their most pressing questions. Through a series of free webinars, experts will provide guidance and answer questions to help companies navigate these challenging times. We encourage you to take part in this discussion. You can engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by using the hashtag GVBOT. We are also using Slido for today's discussion to allow you to submit questions. You can do this in your internet browser or on your phone. Go to slido.com and enter the code GVBOT-PROV-BC. Before we start, and especially in these challenging times, we want to thank our long-standing sponsors called our Pillar Partners. They include TELUS, CN, YVR, BCIT, and Air Canada. We are very grateful for their support and their long-standing commitments, and they enable us to do the important work here at the Board of Trade. Thank you as well to our preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver. Today, we are joined by the Honourable Michelle Mungall, Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Competitiveness. In 2002, she was elected to Nelson City Council, the youngest person to serve on the city's council. In 2009, she was elected as the first woman MLA for Nelson Creston, and re-elected in 2013 and 2017. Prior to being appointed as the Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Competitiveness, she was BC's Minister of Energy, Mines and Petroleum Resources. Welcome, Minister. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Bridget, and thank you so much for inviting me to join all of you from throughout BC, but mostly in Vancouver, from my kitchen, which is in the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa Nation. And it's a real pleasure to be with all of you today, because in this time of COVID-19, so many of us are at home, and we don't get many opportunities to socialize. And so I'm really grateful for this. And first, I wanted to say thank you. I want to say thank you to all of the business owners who are tuning in today. 6 months ago, we did not anticipate this is what our lives would be. And in that time frame, we have had to very quickly turn our minds to a global pandemic and what we need to do to respond to that. And so many of you did that with such courage and determination, and you put the needs of your employees first and foremost, making sure that their health and safety was protected. And I want to thank you for doing that, because that was a lot of hard decisions, a lot of expense, and a lot of work that it took to do that. To have to either close your operations, put up the plexiglass that we've all come to know and love at our grocery stores, whatever it may be, that you have done a tremendous job in terms of protecting yourselves, your loved ones, your neighbors, your community, and your employees is commendable. And it's part of the reason why BC has had the good news to date in terms of being able to flatten the curve. There's a lot of work that we still need to do. We know that. And Dr. Henry has been a steadfast guide in keeping us on track to reduce the spread of COVID-19. I also want to thank businesses for the offers of help. I've been on the phone for 7 weeks now, and it's been truly amazing to hear the offers of help coming from all over the province in what can we do? That's what business owners keep saying to me. What can we do to help stop the spread of COVID-19 above and beyond what they're already doing in their own businesses? And so just to give you some examples of some big changes that some of the companies have done to really help with this pandemic, D-Wave in Burnaby is providing free access to their quantum computers for researchers who are looking at how do we reduce the spread of COVID-19, how do we get a vaccine, and so on. So that, I mean, that's a huge help for being able to do that type of research. In Vernon, VO2 Master has adapted its products to build more personal protective equipment for frontline workers. We all know the challenges that frontline workers have been having getting PPE across the world, and that BC businesses are turning their minds, turning their businesses to produce these products is huge help here in BC. Hand sanitizer. The shelves went bare of hand sanitizer very, very quickly. And to see so many distilleries turn around and say, let's help make hand sanitizer here in British Columbia. I have a distillery here in my own riding who's doing just that for the town of Creston. This is a huge help. These types of stories are so numerous, it could take the whole half hour sharing all of them, but it's a real inspiration, and it really shows that as British Columbians, we have a lot to be proud of, especially from our business community, for all that they're doing to help reduce the spread of COVID-19. That being said, this is an extremely difficult time for BC businesses. We are seeing I think the stat is that about 2,000 businesses have seen their revenues drop by 75% or more. We're seeing unprecedented numbers of unemployment. We are seeing businesses having to shut their doors permanently because of concerns in terms of what lies ahead. These are extremely difficult decisions. I am reminded as I speak about one story I read in the news, a family-owned business that had been in operation for 63 years, and it was a beloved restaurant for the local community, and the owners decided that they were going to be shutting their doors permanently because of where they were at in their life. Their business was successful, but they weren't in a position to pass it on to future generations, and they were worried about debt and what that would mean for being able to even pass on their business. This is a hugely difficult decision for that family, and these types of difficult decisions are being made all across the province, and it's just a very, very difficult time. Our government came forward early on with our BC COVID action plan, COVID-19 action plan. We put $5 billion towards that action plan. 1.5 billion of that is earmarked for recovery. And I know that our conversation today is going to be focused on the economic recovery and where to from here. And we've already earmarked money for that. And as we start to get a sense of what's at the end of this tunnel for us, we're starting to understand how we can start building back up again. And I'm going to end my remarks there and open it up for questions, because I know that there's a lot of them. I know they're on that vein of where I was starting to go to. And I look forward to hearing from people and the questions that they have.
Thanks very much, Minister. I appreciate your comments. And before we pivot to recovery, I do want to stop for a couple of minutes and just talk about this $5 billion COVID-19 action plan. And maybe have a broader question, not so much about the specifics of the programs, but you did cite a survey there where noticed that we had a lot of businesses that had seen a revenue drop of 75% or more. We also see about half the businesses that we surveyed in conjunction with the BC Business Council and the BC Chamber, half of the businesses aren't sure if they're going to be able to come back once some of these restrictions are eased. So as you're looking at these government programs and you're hearing from businesses that there are gaps or more could be done, how much of that discussion is happening within government, and can they expect that there could be more changes coming to the programs available?
That's a great question, Bridget, and especially in light of a lot of the programs that have been rolled out are from the federal government. And so what I should let people know is that I'm going to back it up and get to your question. We have a small business roundtable attached to our government with this ministry. And when all of this started to take place, I brought them together so that we could meet bi-weekly and get feedback from our small business roundtable, which has representatives from all over the province, from all sectors, get feedback from them in terms of how our programs are rolling out. Are they meeting the need? And not just from the provincial government perspective and what we're doing, but also federal government, so that I can pass that on to my federal government counterparts who are very, very interested in getting that feedback as well. And so we've been meeting bi-weekly. Those conversations, along with the surveys that the Chamber, BC Chamber has been doing, that CFIB has been doing, and other organizations have been doing, have been very, very useful to feed into government so that we know if our programs are working or not, where the cracks are, and how do we fix that. So as things move ahead, we're always monitoring how things are going, and so trying to make changes so that we can meet the demand and the need that is out there. And we've seen that with some of the federal government. They started with the CEBA, and sorry if I don't remember what that acronym spells out right off the top of my head, but it's that $40,000 loan program that I'm referring to. And we saw that initially a lot of businesses weren't eligible, especially startups. A lot of new businesses weren't eligible. And so providing that feedback to the federal government, they're looking at ways to address those gaps. Part of that is through their funding of community futures, and there's other ways that they've been doing that. So we've been kicking up that feedback, and we're doing the same thing, and that's why we altered our property tax reductions so that we could meet the need that's out there.
One of the things that we are hearing from our members, as well as from the broader business community, is around the Employment Standards Act. And I know that we have the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. We've been quite vocal as a member of the Economic Recovery Task Force, as well as through other avenues, about changes for the temporary layoffs provision. And this is a big consideration for a lot of small and medium businesses, particularly as they're looking to temporarily lay off employees, and the provisions under the Act allow for, I believe it's 13 weeks, and we're asking for an extension on behalf of businesses to 16 weeks. Is this something that is active under consideration by the government?
Absolutely. One of our big concerns, and I heard about this concern early on and have been speaking with the Minister of Labour about it, big concern is mass displacement of employer and employees. Employees don't want to suddenly be severed from their job and be displaced in the labor marketplace. And the same thing goes for employers, right? They want to keep their employees. And so we have to look at types of provisions that, when they were first enacted, never foresaw something like this happening, and how do we adjust that? And so I've been working with the Minister of Labour on that, and we are actively engaged in trying to address that issue.
Great, thank you. I'll bring it up again on the next call with the task force. It is a very big issue for many businesses. As we pivot now towards economic recovery, and that does seem to be the conversation is moving more in that direction, as we're seeing better case numbers coming out of British Columbia and signals from Dr. Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix that we're getting to the point where we're going to start talking more about what that recovery plan looks like. Could you talk a little bit about what this $1.5 billion money, what that is earmarked for, and how you see this economic recovery unfolding? Taking cues from other jurisdictions, it does seem like it's going to be gradual, but for a business that is barely surviving right now or really hanging on, what can you tell them about what that recovery stage might look like?
Well, importantly, I'm going to come back to the group that you mentioned, Bridget, which is the Economic Recovery Task Force. You sit on that. BC Business Council sits on that, Surrey Board of Trade sits on that, other organizations are sitting on that as well. And that Economic Recovery Task Force is, in my view, extremely important to helping guide how we start rebuilding after once we get the direction from Dr. Benry that we can start opening up. She's signaled that maybe mid-May we can, but that comes with a lot of caveats that we have to meet in terms of being able to have reduced the spread and reduced our numbers. And so in terms of the economic recovery, I would say that some economists predicted very early on that it was going to be like flicking a switch. That's not the case at all. I want to be really clear that it's going to be more like a slow dialing up of the volume. And we're going to be guided by science and evidence-based decision-making. Those principles, that is one of the principles that the federal government, provincial and territorial governments all came together on. They just released that earlier today, that our decisions have to be science and evidence-based. And Dr. Henry and the Public Health Office is guiding us in all of that, along with the Ministry of Health and Minister Dix. And so as we meet those principles and we meet the 5 basic guidelines that Minister Dix put forward, we're going to be able to start opening things up some more. And but it'll be gradual, and it'll be based on what is the safest things that we can do, and making sure that we maintain social distancing and we maintain our level of reducing the spread of COVID-19.
I think, there seems to be a gradual acceptance of this dial approach rather than a flipping of the switch. Let's go to Slido and see some of the questions that are coming in from some of the viewers of the webinar. And as we're thinking about this pivot to recovery, there's still lots of questions coming in, and we did actually address the first one, or you did rather, on the Employment Standards Act. So maybe I'll skip down to the second one there, because you did say that there is consideration about extending that layoff period, the temporary layoff, past 13 weeks. So the second question is, how is the province of British Columbia planning to assist in stimulating the economy? Great question. And, does this speak to the $1.5 billion budget set aside, or funding set aside rather, around recovery?
It totally does. And that Economic Recovery Task Force is going to be involved in identifying ways in which we can take that funding and best implement it province-wide so that we're stimulating the economy. There's a variety of things that we need to consider in that. And in terms of, I wish I had a crystal ball to know exactly where the world was going to be and how best to position British Columbia to take some of the opportunities that are going to come so that we can stimulate our economy, but I don't. So one of the things that you have to do is look at what are some of the businesses around the province, all sizes, small, medium, and large, saying to me in the last 7 weeks as I've been talking to them. And one of the things that's coming across is a real interest in diversifying supply chain. A large part of our supply chain originates, once manufactured, originates in Asia. So there's a greater interest in seeing some more supplies be made closer to home. So what's the opportunity for British Columbia to produce certain things closer to home? So we have to do that type of analysis and then see how we can support those sectors in building up more. So those are the types of things that we're looking at in terms of stimulating economic recovery. And of course, there's other projects that are happening. A lot of, I've been speaking with some of our larger industry, BC's foundational industries, for example, in mining, industries that we need to heat our homes, for example. They all have capital projects that they're looking at. How do we work with them to make sure that we're doing our due diligence in the regulatory process, but we're not causing more red tape in this time when we need to get capital projects off the ground that provide jobs and that help stimulate smaller businesses and medium businesses in terms of their supply chains to do those projects.
So when you say looking at that red tape, I think that's music to the business community's ears, because I think one of the things that governments generally, the provincial government here, your government, as well as the federal government, has shown how quickly it can respond when there is a crisis. And so the business community and our members saying that hopes that sort of entrepreneurial mindset is continues on past this crisis, and looking to see where some of those barriers can be removed for business. So do you see that as a priority for your government coming out of this?
I think so. And I think that, and when I say red tape, I want to be really clear that government has a responsibility to do due diligence. It has a responsibility on behalf of the broader public to make sure that the broader public's interests are being met. And I don't think anybody in business is saying don't do that. Don't make sure that the water is still going to be clean after we do a major project. Don't do X, Y, and Z to make sure that the public interest is being met. We have to still do our due diligence, but how can we do it in a way that adds more resources perhaps to the process, and so that we can get things out the door more quickly? How do we do it in a way, I mean, I won't pretend that there isn't red tape. There are. I'm responsible for reviewing areas in which we can be reducing red tape. And so that's something that I think we need to be doing for sure.
Now, here's a bit of a crystal ball question, and it's the second one there about whether COVID-19, how it's changed BC's economic makeup, and maybe not, maybe for good, or maybe kind of medium to long term. There's no question that, BC has a very diversified economy, but when you look at the impacts of this crisis and the long-term recovery for some sectors, particularly tourism comes to mind, how do you think this crisis has changed our economic makeup?
Well, I already talked about diversifying supply chain, and I think that is something that's going to be happening on a global scale, and that's just my opinion today. We'll see what happens in the days and weeks and months ahead, but I think that there's going to be a real strong interest in diversifying the global supply chain, and so that is one of the ways that our economy is going to shift. I think that BC will still have its foundational sectors. It'll still have a strong natural resource sector. But the big question that I have, and I can only say that it's a bit of a wait and see right now, is how things are going to roll out for the tourism and hospitality sector. That's because we don't know when travel restrictions are going to be lifted in terms of international travel. It has to follow the science. It has to follow the need to reduce COVID-19, and that's dependent a lot on what other jurisdictions are doing and how they're addressing the pandemic. We don't necessarily know how comfortable Canadians are going to feel, or even British Columbians are going to feel in terms of traveling within their own jurisdiction once they can. My area where I am, Nelson Crescent, beautiful part of the world, and I invite people to come when it's safe to do so. We rely heavily on tourism. The summer months are very important. It's often a make or break month for many of the businesses in my area, and that's true for a lot of places in British Columbia. So the challenge is going to be when it's safe to come, will people do that? And it's hard to know that right now.
And that really talks, there's a couple of questions here really around the same thought here. So for those working in tourism, and it does say entertainment, that it looks like it's going to be a much longer recovery period. How is the industry, what advice do you have for employers in these industries in dealing with these temporary layoffs, knowing that, under the Employment Standards Act, there's that 13-week only the 13-week period. Is this something that your government's looking at in regards to the longer term recovery of some of those industries?
Like I said earlier, around the 13 weeks, absolutely. And we have to keep in mind that for some businesses, and I said, it's a slow dial, as we dial back up, some might be facing a longer period of layoff for their employees than other industries. And so we have to keep that in mind. And so that's part of the conversations we're having.
And as your government is looking towards recovery and knowing that it could be quite a long time until we're seeing significant economic growth, what is your modeling telling you, and what should businesses be prepared for, not just really in the next 2 to 3 months, but really over, maybe in 2021? What's the best information that you have available on this?
Well, I think we're sadly going to be seeing a global recession, is what a lot of the economists are saying, and I mean all indicators, whether you're in a small community like myself or you're looking at a larger global picture, certainly shows that that's going to be the case. And so then the question is, how does that going to be able to impact what BC is able to do? Because we are an open, but we are also a small economy in terms of that global picture. So a lot of what we are able to do is actually just react to what's going on in the world. I had a great conversation yesterday with one of the vice presidents at Teck, large mining company headquartered in Vancouver, and a lot of its operations in my part of the world and the Kootenays here. And one of the things that impacts their ability to invest in British Columbia, of course, is commodity prices, which is something that happens outside of British Columbia. So these are the types of things that we have to look at. We have to do our best to prepare, but ultimately we're in a reaction position. And so as we look to see opportunities for growth, we're going to have to be able to be nimble with what's going on with the rest of the world.
And just pulling on that thread a little bit, Minister, under your ministry, competitiveness is one of your priorities, and certainly speaks very near and dear to my heart when I think about the competitiveness of this region. And there has been a perception perhaps that British Columbia lacked in competitiveness when it comes to we don't have a lot of head offices, and there are some barriers for business. So when you look at competitiveness and you think about coming out of this pandemic, what advice do you have for business as it thinks about making this a real thriving region and really competitive, not only on the national stage, but globally as well?
Well, I'm going to say that there's a few things that position BC to be on a strong footing coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic from an economic standpoint. From a government, we had zero operating debt. BC had, going into COVID-19 pandemic, we had low unemployment, we had low debt to GDP ratio, and we were proving ourselves to be a very diverse, very resilient economy. I think with the pandemic and our response to date, we have shown that we take this seriously, we take challenges seriously, and British Columbia as a whole is prepared and able to meet those challenges and do its best coming out of it. To me, that's a very strong message to the world that British Columbia is a good place to invest. And coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, which it will happen, is that if you're looking for those global investors, if you're looking for a safe place to invest, a good place to invest, a place that has long-term prospects, British Columbia is the destination of choice.
And perhaps have time for one last question. I'm going to amalgamate some of the thoughts that are coming through here on Slido. But if this crisis continues, and whether that means a more prolonged recovery, or maybe it means that we could have a second wave coming in the fall, have we seen all of the supports and resources that coming from government, or can businesses expect to see that there will be more support as the situation becomes more dire?
I really want to make sure that everybody who's tuning in today knows that this government is with you. We are not about to walk away and say, we did enough, we're good. That's not going to happen. We're all in this together, and it's not just a statement to say, it is something to live by every single day as this pandemic continues. We're all in this together, and so putting that into action means that we're constantly monitoring the programs that are coming out from all levels of government and making sure that they're working, and if they're not, we're going to fix it.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Minister. I do appreciate it. And no doubt we'll be speaking again about the province's role in helping businesses recover as we get through this pandemic. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much, Bridget. And just a reminder that there's a ton of resources out there for people through our Small Business BC nonprofit, online through hotline services of email, chat, and phone. And if you need any help, don't hesitate to get in touch.
Great, thank you. Stay well, Minister. And up on the slide or on your screen, you can see some of the links to different resources available for small and medium businesses. And you're able to watch this webinar again. You can do so by visiting theboardoftrade.com and taking a look at our COVID-19 page. As well, we do have our resource page that we have been keeping up to date in the last 7 weeks, and we will continue to do that as more resources become available for businesses and for individuals as well. And so to visit that, you just need to go to boardoftrade.com and to go to our COVID-19 page, which will have links that we will continue to update as more resources become available for businesses and individuals. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we will be back with more resources and more webinars in the coming days. To echo the wise words of Dr. Bonnie Henry, our Provincial Medical Health Officer, be kind, be calm, be safe.